Continuing on with the course in 5 rings, this is lesson 3. We're going to discuss part 2 of the Book of Earth. We're going to talk about the meaning of the 5 parts of the Book of Strategy, why he selected it, the Buddhist concept of the universe, which is earth, water, fire, wind, and no thing, and how those things apply to different aspects of your life. We're also going to talk about why he considers his school to be one way with 2 swords. In the Book of Earth, the strategy of the school is explained, and you're being told the reasons for his writings as well as their structure. He teaches that you must not depend on understanding your art by only studying the one art you are involved with. It's difficult to understand the universe if you only study one planet. You must be aware of all of the arts by becoming familiar with many of them through complete devotion to the one. He suggests you endeavor to know all things. Though you cannot do this, you will be more aware of the world around you, which is essential strategy if you choose to be a warrior. In the Book of Water, he explains that water fills all shapes and eventually wears down any form of captivity. Now, there are many ways of understanding the simplest of things, and generally it is the opposite for difficult ideas. He says to study what he says with the desire to understand his way of strategy, Musashi's way of strategy. When you have mastered the basics of sword fighting, you will be able to beat one man or many men. And it would be the same if you were fighting a countless horde, as long as your strength remained with you. The amount of strength you have depends on the training and practice you put into your art. It's important to understand that all things can only be built from the ground up and in one stage at a time. So that you approach yourself and consider yourself to be a master, you must maintain the focus on yourself as a master so that you can open up the universe to reveal to you what it takes to function on the level of a master. And yes, there is perfection. Understand that spirit is that thing that must be concentrated on. To know 10,000 things, know one well. It's difficult to understand these ideas that he speaks of broadly, and you must do it through the use of words. So therefore you must define by your own feelings what your approach to all the things and all the challenges in life are, and you must maintain a form of integrity so that you only have to answer to yourself. And this is very, very strategic thinking. Understand that reality is mostly intuitive. A proper attitude of spirit must be constantly studied. The Water Book explains the specifics and particulars of Musashi's Ichi school. The Book of Fire is about fighting. The Book of Fire is about passion. When a man fights in real combat, his spirit becomes fierce, or he gets killed very easily. But there's a time for the spirit to be large, and there's a time for the spirit to be small. In order to be able to determine the possible outcomes of combat situations, you must constantly maintain the attitude of practicing diligently. It's not like, hey, it's Wednesday, I'll practice an hour. Well, I'm busy Thursday, let's see if I can get some time in on Friday. It doesn't work that way if you want to maintain absolute mastery of perfection of the art that you've chosen. And in this particular instance, with Musashi, it's mastery of the sword. It goes on further. Musashi goes further to say that you can only fight the way you practice. Now keep in mind that this book was written at a time in medieval Japan when mortal combat was a way of life. And so you could look at somebody and somebody could look at you, and no need for a discussion, the blades come out. And this was a common practice until many years later when the sword was essentially outlawed. But we're talking about now what it takes to ascend to a high level of mastery, regardless of the discipline you're studying. And the same applies to being unarmed. Karate, judo, aikido, kung fu, any of the disciplines, any of the combat disciplines that entail a possibility of a life and death situation is what the Book of Five Rings is all about. Yes, it can be applied in other areas and in other disciplines, but we're going to focus primarily on the sword as a way of life. By maintaining the attitude of constant practice and practicing diligently with proper spirit, you ensure your ability to become that much stronger. When studying the art of strategy, it's necessary to practice day and night. I cannot stress this enough, and Musashi constantly iterates that you can't stress this enough. Your normal life must be a life of strategy. Full combat and battle is explained in the Book of Fire. Your spirit must remain unchanged as long as you study, as long as you love the warrior life, as long as you live the warrior life. The Book of Wind goes on and concerns itself with the strategies and teachings of other schools and the traditions of the past. Now, there are obvious differences, and there are differences that are not easy to ascertain. And you must be careful not to study methods that diverge from true teachings. He makes the differences very clear and easy to understand. You must constantly study your way to ensure that you do not lose your way. It's very easy to be sidetracked from the direct method. You must understand what he is talking about, and he constantly reiterates this. And the difference between his school and others are explained. It's not wrong to think that certain methods of teaching sword fighting are incorrect. If you feel that they're not right for you, they may be right for someone else, but you're concerned with your development of your own personal self. Okay? Now, it's easy to understand the first four books of the Rings. Introductory remarks concerning the outline of the 5 books should be evident when simply reviewed. The basic idea of the very idea of strategy is the attitude of being or not being. And we'll expand upon that one. However, the 5th book, the Book of No-Thingness, you're going to learn that the only way of strategy is also the way of nature. And that there's no difference except for the way and the manner in which you conceive or misconceive of yourself is what you're doing as a truth or not a truth. When you understand the way of strategy, you will be able to hit one man without thought in a completely natural manner. Musashi further elucidates that because this system employs both swords, a warrior must hold the sword in one hand. True, and it is hard to use a sword correctly when it's held with both hands, except perhaps in certain forms of practice, certain forms of kendo, certain forms of iaido. Okay? But in those disciplines as well, there are many times that you're going to use one hand on the sword. It's very hard to explain these ideas in detail because of their intuitive nature. Once you have understood the depth of the thing you are studying, the spirit of the thing that you are studying will reveal its inner secrets to you based on your devotion to it. Now, there's a closeness between the warrior and his weapon. You know, you've heard the expression, the sword is the soul of the samurai. That's only half a statement. The whole statement should be, the sword is the soul of the samurai, when the samurai is the soul of the sword. Because each is an extension of the other. An ego cannot play a place in the functionality of a war situation or a combat situation where life and death is up for grabs. To further illustrate my point, consider the unarmed warrior as closer to the ideal because no weapon other than empty hands is used. To go even further, consider the attitude of thing, no thing, which must not be confused with the concept of nothing, which still remains something by definition. That we'll take up in depth as we get into the Book of No Thing. However, the sword is a physical object. And as such, because of its very nature, it is feared by men. The craft of the warrior and his way is the only thing that deals directly with physical living and physical dying. You cannot say you're a warrior if you're a bicycle racer. I'm not denigrating that. I'm just saying a warrior is only a warrior based on the concept of having been in war. Work on that one if you have to. Other arts do not necessarily function on life and death. Boxing, yes. Mixed martial arts, yes. All of these things have a very, very crucial aspect of their own character, which can get you killed or not, as the case may be. And to understand the universe, you must be in accord with the truth of other matters. In order to understand more deeply the conviction needed to pursue the way of the warrior. Other ways do not deal with life and death. They deal with ideas that may or may not be acceptable to others, philosophically, politically, religiously, but not necessarily life and death. And this is where the distinction is significant. And you have to understand this. There is a significant difference between beating a man intellectually and physically taking his life. And we live in a physical world and are governed by the things that can affect us physically, much more than by psychological browbeating. You know. Psychological bullying. You know, you bully a person so long, he'll eventually fall apart or attack in ways that you can't conceive of. Out of the terror factor. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about mastery of the self. Using the sword to come to terms with your own magnificence of creation. Remember, each weapon has its own spirit. Each weapon must be used in its proper place in order to be effective so that the handler of the weapon can be effective and take advantage of its properties. The ultimate weapon, again, is thing, no thing. Attack weapons like the spear and the bow are good at the onset of a battle, but become virtually useless. Remember, we're talking medieval times when these weapons were the main instruments of combat. Because in the final analysis, after all the arrows were shot and after all the spears were thrown, you went at each other with swords. It was an interesting time, that's for sure. Well, let's not divulge any hidden passions or secrets here. But keep it in mind, you know. You walked down the street, you walked along the Tokaido Highway, you had a sword, you had two swords. And there were always people looking to take you out. That was the nature of the society at that time. Regardless of the exquisiteness of the floating worlds and things like that. The inordinate beauty of the arts and music of the time. The sword was predominantly used as an extension of the self. You can never forget that.